All right, welcome to Module 12. This module is focused primarily on the presidency, which refers to the office of the president, which is authorized by Article 2 of the Constitution. We need to keep in mind that the framers were deeply divided on the issue of adding a chief executive to the system of government that they were, kind of contemplating. Some delegates were fearful of creating an institution with a unified executive that could devolve into a tyrannical government. For example, Edmund Randolph, a delegate from Virginia, feared that a unitary executive would constitute the fetus of monarchy. Other delegates were more fearful that the current government, under the Articles of Confederation, demonstrated the frailty of a government lacking a vigorous executive. Over the course of the convention, those supporting a singular executive elected indirectly by the electors ultimately won out. They created an institution with significant powers and significant constraints. Article 2, Section 1 has 8 sections, which deals primarily with terms of office, the selection process, eligibility requirements, what to do in the event of a vacancy, compensation, and the guarantee that presidential pay could not be reduced or increased while a president was in office, and establishes a requirement that the president swear an oath of office, which reads, "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States." Article 2, Section 2 lays out the powers of the president, includes the powers authority as commander-in-chief of the military. Additional powers include the power to negotiate treaties with foreign powers, subject to the Senate's advice and consent, as well as the president's power to nominate judges and executive branch officials, and the veto power, of course, which is actually in Article 1. Article 2, Sections 3 and 4 list the responsibilities of the chief executive, including the requirement that the president issue a report on the state of the union to Congress. They can call Congress back into session in extraordinary circumstances and receive ambassadors and public ministers from foreign countries. Importantly, the language in this article admonishes the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And this has been interpreted as granting the president considerable inherent power to take action in furtherance of their enumerated powers. Also, very importantly, Article 2, Section 4 includes provisions for the removal of a president who has been impeached by a majority of the House of Representatives and subsequently removed by a 2/3 majority of the Senate. The causes for impeachment could be treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. The idea for such a process of removal was necessitated because in the absence of such a process, the only resort would be to assassination. So the framers wanted a procedure in place that could hold an abusive executive accountable, cleanse the office, but that would be sufficiently challenging that it would be difficult for a partisan majority to, wield impeachment at a whim, and thereby preserving the independence of the chief executive. Presidents wear several hats in their role as president. The assigned reading notes 6 of the formal roles that the president plays in American government. The first is the idea that the president is the head of state, which means they stand as the symbolic person, that symbolize the authority and the unity of the United States. Within this formal role, the president often acts informally, as, for example, the mourner-in-chief, as when former President Barack Obama sang Amazing Grace at the memorial for 9 black church members murdered by a white supremacist in their church in Charleston, South Carolina, in his second term in office. Second, presidents also fill the role of chief executive or head of government, meaning that the president is the primary office holder responsible for heading up the governing process. Within that role, the Constitution lists specific responsibilities, including the appointment power, the power to direct agency heads, to change policies related to that department's operations and implementation of policy, issuing pardons or reprieves for violations of federal law, As we found out over the course of the Trump administration, presidents cannot issue pardons for convictions under state law. And presidents can issue executive orders that can dramatically change federal policies, as then President Obama did when he issued an executive order called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, which suspended action on children who came into the country illegally so long as they break no other laws. Third, presidents act as the chief legislator, meaning that presidents have extensive influence over the legislative process, which may include lobbying members of Congress to shape legislation, using the State of the Union address to offer proposals that members of Congress may adopt and submit as a bill, signing or vetoing legislation passed by Congress, and or again issuing executive orders, which I noted above with Obama's DACA decision. Presidents may issue at times when Congress is gridlocked on an issue. And there's been no question that for the last 20 years or more, we've needed more legislation on immigration. Unfortunately, we are simply too polarized to achieve that. Fourth, presidents act as commander-in-chief. Under Article 2, making the president the ultimate military authority over all military forces, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. Presidents lack the formal authority to declare war, but they can blow things up. They can use combat troops. Since World War II, the U.S. has not formally declared war on any power, but they have engaged in numerous full-scale military operations, including Korea, including Vietnam, and several other instances. Obviously, the European occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan as well. That has led some to criticize the expansion of presidential power under its commander-in-chief authority as sort of an imperial presidency, which I'll discuss in greater detail shortly. Fifth, presidents act as the chief diplomat, meaning the president bears the primary responsibility for formulating and conducting American foreign policy. Among the authorities granted by the Constitution suggests, again, the primacy of the president in foreign policy, and include, again, the president's power to negotiate treaties, the authority to receive foreign ambassadors, the hosting of delegations of other nations at the White House, as well as, again, the president's commander-in-chief authority and the ability to basically use military power when national interest or national security is at play. In order to aid the president in formulating and implementing foreign policy, Congress has created numerous executive branch agencies, including the state and defense departments, the National Security Council, the Central Intelligence Agency, and a number of others. Sixth, presidents are the nominal leaders of their party and exert significant influence over their party's agenda. As party leader, the president acts as the symbolic leader of the party. And they select the national party chair, and they serve as the party's chief fundraiser. And when possible, presidents try to campaign on behalf of their party's candidates, especially those candidates they're facing tough races. Frequently, a president's ability to get fellow members of their party elected are conditioned on their popularity and the states where they're running. For example, current President Joe Biden may want to help Democratic candidates running in Oklahoma, but the fact is he's simply unpopular in this state, and that would likely make his efforts a waste of time and money. Presidential power has evolved considerably over the course of U.S. history. In George Washington's time, the office of the president was quite modest, and the expectation was that presidents' responsibilities would remain relatively modest. Over time, several factors have contributed to the expansion of presidential power and authority, and a lot of this happened in the 20th century, to the point again where political scientists viewed the administrations of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon as comprising a kind of imperial presidency, which contributed to the resignation of Richard Nixon following the scandals associated with the break-in of the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in 1972. What are some factors that contributed to the expansion of presidential authority? First, the expansion of the size of the United States naturally contributed to greater executive authority. The Civil War also saw significant expansion of Abraham Lincoln's capacity to prosecute the war. Another important development over the course of the 19th century occurred during the Progressive Era, as Congress began to cede to the executive regulatory authority with the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate the railroads. For most of the 19th century, expansions of presidential authority would produce congressional pullbacks, so pushbacks. So there was sort of a pendulum swinging here. In the 20th century, real and permanent changes to executive authority occurred as really beginning with the Great Depression, which was a global economic calamity that devastated the American economy as well as the economies of much of the developed world, the advanced economies of Europe and elsewhere. As noted in our discussion of federalism, the Great Depression fundamentally altered the relationship between the federal government and states, and much of the power that accrued to the federal government gathered in the executive branch, which is again managed by the presidency. Franklin Roosevelt campaigned for office in 1932, promising a New Deal for the forgotten man, and promised to use the power of the federal government to combat the Great Depression. The New Deal instituted an activist government with numerous programs designed to regulate important aspects of the U.S. economy, and the American people of the early and mid 20th century increasingly came to expect that the federal government would act to protect and advance the well-being of the American people. In addition to the Great Depression, World War II and the Cold War led to the establishment of a permanent military establishment, which included a powerful intelligence community. The president's military control was further expanded by the Vietnam conflict as Congress ceded to Lyndon Johnson relatively unlimited authority to prosecute the conflict with what was known as the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was effectively a blank check. The mid-20th century also saw the rise of civil rights movements, advancing the cause of women and numerous other ethnic minorities that had previously been subjected to discrimination. The 20th century also saw the rise of the Environmental Protection Agency and environmental movements generally to implement a raft of environmental protection statutes. Again, all these things basically are tools that presidents now have at their disposal. And in each instance, these actions expanded the government, primarily in the form of the executive branch, and again, providing presidents with powerful tools to act on a dramatically expanded array of issues. Presidents increasingly must be seen controlling and in control of events in order to maintain popular support. The assigned reading describes several different kinds of presidential power. For example, expressed powers are those that are directly and explicitly enumerated by the Constitution. Some people describe these powers as enumerated powers. The power of the president to veto legislation or recognize foreign ambassadors are clearly examples of expressed powers. In contrast, inherent powers are those that are considered to be extensions of expressed powers. The basis for claims to inherent power come both from the vesting clause in Article 2 and in the take care clause in Article 2, Section 3. Examples of claims to inherent power include Thomas Jefferson's deal with France to purchase the Louisiana territories in 1803. Likewise, the Supreme Court ultimately held that Donald Trump's executive order limiting immigration from designated countries that had originally been described by Trump as a Muslim ban fell under the president's inherent power to protect the nation's border. Regardless of whether you agree with the Supreme Court's decisions, presidents clearly have a national security mandate to ensure that the nation's borders are protected. Now, how to better secure the border is clearly an issue of contention between Democrats and Republicans. The third form of presidential power described in the assigned reading are described as statutory powers. And these are powers that Congress delegates to the executive branch, to an executive branch agency, which again accrue to the president. The reading notes the passage of the National Security Act our National Emergency Act of 1976 as an illustration of how Congress can dramatically expand presidential power to act swiftly to respond to emergencies stemming from natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and the like. Another issue of a statutory power is, that was derived from Congress is the Defense Production Act of 1950, which gives the president authority to direct private businesses to produce materials deemed necessary for national defense, regardless of the cost. This act came to the nation's attention recently when Trump invoked the NDA to produce ventilators and other medical supplies viewed as essential for combating the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to stop here. There's a lot more to discuss about the nature of presidential power, so please don't be shy about asking me questions in the weekly discussion. If there's anything in the reading on Congress or the presidency that confuses you, or if you just want to hear the opinions of your classmates or me, please feel free to ask a question. All right, I'll see you next time.